Israel and Hamas both appear to be hardening their positions against any new ceasefire. Qatar, a key broker between the two sides, says the chances for another pause in the fighting are diminishing today. That is video handed out by the Israeli military showing ground forces fighting in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. There's no indication when it was recorded. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claims dozens of Hamas fighters are surrendering. And the latest fighting means, quote, the beginning of the end of Hamas. An Israeli military spokesperson says this morning ground forces are now engaging in battles in 3 key parts of Gaza. Khan Yunis in the south, as well as Gaza City and Jabalia in the north. This is new video into us from Jabalia. It captures the sounds of the fighting there. Hamas is making a new threat this morning, saying none of the 137 remaining hostages in Gaza will be returned unless Israel negotiates a new prisoner exchange. All of that, the backdrop for our conversation this morning with senior international correspondent Margaret Evans. She's live in Jerusalem with us this hour. Margaret, a new pause in the fighting, that is what is needed for any new exchange of hostages and prisoners. More aid would likely be part of any deal like that, too. So all of that thrown into sort of in limbo by these new warnings. Tell us more about them and the urgent need for relief.
Well, as you've said and shown our viewers this morning, Heather, the fighting is continuing to intensify in Gaza. You're talking about fighting in the north. You have to remember the fighting up there has been going on now for 2 months, and they're still fighting. So it gives you a sense of just how raging the battle is. And in the meantime, aid agents continue to warn that it is the civilians who are suffering the most. And we see these images getting worse, if that's even possible, every day. They're relentless of families in areas like Khan Yunis, where airstrikes take place on a nightly and daily basis, being brought into the hospital. Yesterday, there was aid agency footage of a little boy sitting beside the bodies of his mother and father and other family members wrapped in those white body bags or shrouds that we've come to see. We see children with limbs amputated, and the sense that there is, that they say there is nowhere safe for them to go. We've seen people continuing to move now from Khan Yunis down into towards Rafah. And then again, we have these warnings from aid agencies saying that the situation is catastrophic and that the humanitarian situation may even be in danger of collapse. Last night, we saw images of some aid trucks crossing over the border from Egypt into Gaza, into Rafah, and people running after the trucks, trying to jump on them, get under the tarpaulin that covers up the aid coming in, and to pull out whatever they can. And that's the warning that you're hearing from aid agencies about the potential breakdown of civil order there. You're also hearing warnings from some in UNRWA, the aid agency that takes care of refugees, that Palestinians are increasingly afraid that they will actually be pushed out of Gaza, and that is potentially a plan by the Israelis. Of course, Israel rejects that. And then, as you've mentioned, you have Hamas saying they will not release any more hostages alive unless Israel gives in to its demands, to Hamas demands. Israel insists that a pause isn't the answer right now, that what they need is force that will force Hamas to give up the hostages.
Margaret, Palestinians in the West Bank are staging a new protest over the war this morning. What's happening there?
That's right. They've actually called for a strike across the occupied territories, and Palestinian communities in countries like Jordan as well are taking part. Lebanon, big Palestinian communities there, concerned about what's happening in the occupied territories. There are constant, almost nightly raids by Israeli forces into some militant strongholds, but Palestinians say also just into ordinary villages to take people they consider to be activists with affiliation potentially with militant groups, picking up young people who've been throwing stones. Quite often these raids can turn deadly. Overnight, we've heard about 28 people being arrested by Israeli forces all over the occupied West Bank. So Hebron, Bethlehem, Jericho, Nablus. That gives you a sense of the kind of bubbling nature of anger and fear here. But there is, of course, the Palestinians here feel as one with the Palestinians in Gaza, even though there's a divide between the political factions, Hamas running Gaza, Fatah running the occupied West Bank. People have family, and they feel like they're seeing that they're being ignored by the international community.
We, as Palestinians, feel that we've been sent to the slaughterhouse, and that there is international agreement that it's okay, that it is not okay to call for a ceasefire, that somehow calling for a ceasefire is not conducive to peace.
The Israelis, of course, Heather, would say, many Israelis would say that their peace will not come unless they can ensure that the threat of Hamas in Gaza next to their border is removed entirely, so that you could not see a repeat of those October 7th attacks.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Margaret Evans, our senior international correspondent from Israel.